Welcome, gentle soul, to another quiet visit with the past. Tonight, our story drifts back more than 3,000 years to the golden sands of ancient Egypt, a place of sunlight and silence, of temples that once shimmered beneath the desert sky. Together, we'll wander through the life of a woman both powerful and mysterious, Queen Nefertiti, the beauty who vanished from history, leaving only her perfect face behind. Maybe you're listening as your thoughts begin to soften, or perhaps you're already sinking into stillness. However you've arrived here, I'm grateful you did. I love imagining this story finding you, wherever you are, whatever time of night it might be. If these calm journeys through forgotten worlds bring you peace, I'd be honored if you subscribed. There are many more gentle stories waiting, and many quiet nights still to come. You are standing at the edge of an ancient world. The wind that moves across the desert is the same wind that once brushed the painted walls of palaces, the same dry air that carried the scent of incense and the faint echo of footsteps on stone floors. It is quiet now, the silence of 3,000 years. But if you listen closely, you might still sense the presence of someone who once ruled Egypt beside a king who tried to change the gods themselves. Her name was Nefertiti, and one day she simply vanished. No one recorded her death. No ancient scribe carved the date on limestone. No tomb was marked with her image or her name. She was there, radiant and powerful, until suddenly she was gone. Her disappearance is one of history's gentlest mysteries, not a murder or a scandal, but a fading, a slow erasure of a woman who had once been carved into every temple wall, who had stood shoulder to shoulder with a pharaoh, and who had once been called beloved of the living Aten. The desert does not hurry. It buries stories grain by grain, year by year. When archaeologists first uncovered the fragments of her city, they found bits of painted plaster, the curl of a lip, the outline of a slender neck, the trace of a golden headdress. Pieces of a woman once so adored that her likeness was used to symbolize beauty itself. But of her final days, there was nothing. No records, no body, only questions written in the dust. The Egypt that Nefertiti knew was not the Egypt of pyramids and pharaohs that we imagine. Her world was already old, ancient even to the ancients. It was a place of temples older than memory, of rituals repeated for centuries without change. By the time she lived, Egypt was an empire of habits. Incense burned at dawn, hymns sung to the gods, grain tallied and stored. The rhythm of life was slow and predictable, tied to the Nile's steady rise and fall. And yet, within that quiet order, something extraordinary happened. A queen and a king decided to reshape the heart of religion itself. Before we reach that transformation, we must linger here, at the edge of what is known. Because this story is not only about Nefertiti's beauty, or her crown, or even her disappearance. It is about how civilizations remember, and how they forget. In her time, she was called Great Royal Wife, Lady of Grace, beloved of the two lands, and for a brief moment, she was perhaps the most visible woman in the world. But history is a patient eraser. Names fade, temples crumble, and what remains are faint lines on broken stone, deciphered by people thousands of years later under electric light. If you imagine her life, do not imagine a queen in a golden palace. Imagine instead the hum of daily things. Sandals scuffing over limestone, the scrape of paint on plaster, the quiet rustle of linen. Imagine the sun rising over the eastern cliffs and spilling into the courtyards of Amarna, where she might have walked in silence, a servant carrying a mirror made of polished copper, a scribe waiting nearby with a tablet, ready to record a hymn or decree. These were the small, steady rhythms of her world, the background music of eternity. Her husband, the pharaoh Akhenaten, would become famous for his religious revolution, for turning Egypt's many gods into one, the Aten, the disk of the sun. But before his reforms, before the new city and the heresy, there was Nefertiti. She appears suddenly in history, already grown, already regal, as if she stepped out of sunlight fully formed. Her origins are uncertain. Some say she was the daughter of a noble named A. Others think she may have come from a foreign court. But the records do not say, and so we are left only with her name. The beautiful one has come. A name that sounds like a whisper of arrival. When we look at her sculpted face, the famous bust discovered in a sculptor's workshop, we are looking not at her in life, but at an ideal. The paint, the symmetry, the long neck, all part of an image crafted to last forever. And yet even that image, so perfectly preserved, was buried, forgotten, and rediscovered by chance in 1912. For over 3,000 years she lay unseen, waiting in the stillness of a ruined city. It is strange how history holds its breath like that, how memory sleeps until someone wakes it again. The more we learn about her, the less we seem to know. She was powerful, yes, depicted in royal scenes, performing sacrifices, driving chariots, and wearing the blue crown of kingship. She shared in her husband's divine role, appearing equal to him in art. But what does equality mean in a world built on ritual and hierarchy? Was she a true co-ruler, or only a reflection of his belief in harmony and light? These are questions that linger, soft as the dust on temple floors. For now, imagine her standing at the edge of a sunlit courtyard, her eyes turned upward. The rays of a 10 fall upon her face, and she raises her hands in worship. Behind her, the city of Akhetaten is alive, builders shouting, children laughing, priests singing to the rising sun. It is morning in Egypt, and everything seems eternal. But time is always moving forward, quiet and unstoppable. One day those same walls will crack, those same names will be chipped away, and her story will be reduced to fragments. What remains of Nefertiti is not her life, but her absence. You might wonder why such a woman would vanish so completely. Was she exiled? Did she die in childbirth? Did she take another name and rule as a pharaoh in disguise? Or was her memory erased by those who came after, by priests determined to undo the heresy of her husband's reign? No one knows. The answers are hidden beneath centuries of silence, buried in unfinished tombs and lost papyrus scrolls. And yet, her disappearance tells us something about time, that even the most powerful names can fade into quiet. That history is not a solid line, but a shifting desert, reshaping itself with every wind. In that shifting sand, Nefertiti's story survives, not because we know it, but because we wonder. We wonder who she was, what she believed, and why she vanished. We wonder how beauty could be eternal and forgotten at the same time. Tonight, as you listen, you will walk slowly through her world, through the cities she built, the prayers she spoke, and the choices that changed the course of Egyptian history. You will see how ordinary days, the counting of grain, the writing of letters, the simple act of building walls, formed the foundations of empires. And perhaps, in the quiet rhythm of it all, you will understand how the greatest mystery in history is not disappearance, but survival. Because even in her silence, Nefertiti remains. And so we begin, with the question that still drifts across the desert sands. How can a queen so beloved, so visible and so powerful and simply vanish without a trace? Before Nefertiti ever walked the palace halls, Egypt was already old. By the time of her birth, the land had seen more than 1,000 years of kings, of floods and harvests, of prayers rising to gods whose names were already ancient. The pyramids at Giza had long been relics, the desert winds had softened their sharp edges. And in Thebes, the city of temples and of memory, priests still whispered the same hymns that their ancestors had sung by torchlight. The Egypt of the 18th dynasty was a land of order. Not the order of quiet simplicity, but the steady rhythm of repetition. Every dawn began with the same rituals, offerings placed before the gods, incense burned to greet the sun, a priest reciting from scrolls worn smooth by centuries of use. The pharaoh's duty was to maintain this balance, what the Egyptians called ma'at, the harmony between heaven and earth, the measured heartbeat of creation. To disrupt ma'at was to invite chaos, and so, every action, every offering, every construction of stone, was meant to keep the world from unraveling. You can imagine the early morning light falling on the Nile, fishermen pushing their small boats into the calm current, the soft splash of oars, the glint of bronze fishhooks, the distant bray of donkeys from the fields. It was not a land of noise, but of sound layered in patience. The hum of bees in papyrus reeds, the creak of wooden wheels on packed earth, the low chant of workers as they carried baskets of sand. For the people of Egypt, time itself moved with the river, unhurried, predictable, eternal. In the heart of Thebes stood the temple of Amun. Its columns rose like stone forests, painted once in vivid red and blue, though now the colour had faded. Inside, priests tended to the god's statue, bathing it, clothing it in linen, and offering bread and beer. Outside, scribes worked in shaded courtyards, their reed pens scratching lines onto clay and papyrus. They recorded everything: the number of cattle born, the amount of grain stored, the offerings sent to the temple. Each record was small, but together they built the backbone of a civilization. Egypt ran on these details, these steady acts of remembering. It was into this world of quiet precision that Nefertiti's story would unfold. Before her time, kings like Thutmose III and Amenhotep III had built Egypt's empire to its height. Their armies marched as far as Syria, their ships sailed the Mediterranean. Gold came from Nubia, cedar from Lebanon, lapis from the east. Foreign rulers sent gifts, and Egypt replied with statues and scarabs engraved with royal names. It was a world of abundance, and yet one always aware that abundance could vanish. Every Nile flood was a renewal, but also a reminder: if the waters failed, so would the kingdom. To live in Egypt was to live in cooperation with the land itself. Farmers timed their planting with the rise of the river. When it flooded, they waited. When it retreated, they dug canals and sowed seed. The work was slow, repetitive, and essential. In this predictability, the Egyptians found comfort, a pattern that gave meaning to life and to death alike. Every cycle mirrored the journey of the sun, which rose in the east, travelled across the sky, and descended into the underworld each night, only to rise again. In such a world, change was both rare and dangerous. To challenge tradition was to challenge the gods. But history has a way of making change feel inevitable, even when it begins quietly. And in the reign of Amenhotep III, the father of Nefertiti, Wayanta's future husband, small cracks began to form in Egypt's perfection. The priests of Amun had grown wealthy, their power nearly rivaling that of the throne. Temples expanded endlessly, absorbing labor, land, and silver. The god Amun had become the center of worship across the land, an invisible, omnipotent force, hidden deep within sanctuaries that few ever saw. Amenhotep III reigned long and prospered, and under him, Egypt shone like a polished jewel. He called himself the dazzling sun disk. Festivals celebrated him as a living god, as if he and the sun were one. He built enormous statues of himself, colossi that still rise from the Theban plain. He expanded his palace, filled its walls with reliefs of sacred animals and lotus blooms. He commissioned thousands of scarabs bearing records of his deeds, small messages of permanence in a world made of sand. His reign was the height of comfort, and perhaps that comfort invited the next great upheaval. You can picture the city in those final years before Nefertiti's rise, the air thick with the smell of incense and cooking oil, merchants calling out in the markets, offering copper bracelets, honey, and linen, children chasing each other along the riverbank, the temple drums echoing across the water at sunset. For most Egyptians, life remained unchanged for generations, but somewhere within the palace, in quiet chambers decorated with painted ceilings, ideas were shifting, whispers of a single god, not hidden, not enclosed in darkness, but radiant and visible to all, began to surface. The idea of the Aten, the visible sun itself, had begun to form. These were only murmurs then, theological reflections, hymns spoken in private, perhaps among a few priests and scholars. No one could know that within a few decades, those whispers would become a revolution, that the temples of Amun would be abandoned, their statues defaced, and their names chiseled away, that the faith of thousands of years would be silenced in favor of something entirely new. But history rarely announces its turning points in advance. It happens in moments so small, they almost go unnoticed. At this time, somewhere within the noble families of Thebes, a girl named Nefertiti may have been born. She would have grown up in this world of abundance and ritual. She would have seen priests in their white linen robes walking through temple courts, heard the hymns to Amun sung at dawn, and watched the river rise and fall with the seasons. The order of Egypt was her inheritance, an order that would one day be undone by her own hand. In the archives of that period, you find endless details: grain accounts, records of gifts sent to the king, lists of temple workers. Nowhere is her name written. She was not yet the queen who would change everything, just a girl in the background of empire, shaped by its rhythms. And yet, when we look back, it is hard not to imagine that something in her world was already preparing her for what would come. Perhaps she saw how power gathered not in the hands of kings, but in the temples of gods. Perhaps she noticed how belief could bend reality, how statues could command obedience, how ritual could define truth. In her lifetime, those ideas would take form in ways no one could have imagined. But for now, the world around her remained calm, secure, unchanging. Egypt was at peace, the fields were fertile, the temples gleamed in the sunlight, and the people went about their lives as they always had, gathering grain, shaping pottery, singing to the river. They could not have known that soon their gods would fall silent, their cities would move, and their queen would vanish into history. And so, before Nefertiti becomes a queen, before she stands in sunlight beside the heretic pharaoh, we linger here, in the age before her, because to understand her story, we must understand the world she inherited. A world built on faith, precision, and the illusion that nothing could ever change. But change was already waiting, like a shadow at the edge of the Nile, moving slowly toward the light. You are now standing at the threshold of change. The familiar hum of Egypt's ancient religion still fills the air. The prayers to Amun, the scent of incense, the steady rhythm of priests moving through the temple courts. But somewhere within the palace, a young pharaoh is beginning to think differently. His name is Amenhotep IV, and though the river still flows as it always has, the current of belief is beginning to turn. Amenhotep IV was born into a world of abundance. His father, Amenhotep III, had filled Egypt with beauty, colossal statues, serene gardens, endless festivals in honor of the gods. He left behind a kingdom at peace, so rich and stable that it could afford to dream. But sometimes, stability grows heavy, and sometimes the children of comfort seek meaning in silence rather than celebration. When Amenhotep IV took the throne, the priests of Amun still ruled from their temples in Thebes. They controlled vast lands, received offerings from across the empire, and held influence over the court itself. To serve Amun was to serve power, and perhaps the young king saw in that power a shadow, something that rivaled his own divine right. Perhaps he wanted to look beyond the walls of the temple, past the hidden statues, to something larger and more visible, something that belonged to no priest, no tradition, something that was everywhere and in everything. That something was the Aten, the visible sun, the radiant disk that moved silently across the sky, touching every life without discrimination. Unlike Amun, who hid in dark sanctuaries, the Aten revealed himself each morning. He needed no statue, no veil, no secret hymns. His presence was light itself. At first, this was not rebellion. It was reflection. The idea of a single universal God had been growing quietly for generations, whispered in hymns, written in prayers that spoke of the sun's endless renewal. But under Amenhotep IV, it began to take form. He built small shrines dedicated to the Aten, open to the sky rather than enclosed in shadow. The offerings were laid not before an idol, but beneath the open sun. The walls of these early temples were decorated not with scenes of hidden gods, but with the king and queen raising their hands to the light, their faces bathed in its rays. In these first years, Thebes still followed the old ways. Priests still marched in processions, and the temple of Amun still gathered wealth. But within the palace, something was shifting. Scribes began to copy new hymns, praising not Amun, but the Aten. Artists began to experiment with new forms, lighter, more fluid, more natural. The royal family appeared together more often, as if to emphasize their unity under this new light. And beside the king, always, stood Nefertiti. It is here that she enters the story, no longer a background figure, but a presence at the heart of power. Her images begin to appear on temple walls, equal in size and grace to those of her husband. She raises offerings to the Aten, performs rituals once reserved for the pharaoh, and wears the blue crown of rulership. In every relief, the rays of the Aten extend down toward them both, ending in small hands that hold the symbol of life, the Ankh. It is as though the light itself acknowledges them, and only them. The house of the Aten was not just a place of worship, it was an idea, an open temple bathed in sunlight with no roof to block the rays. Columns were carved in rows, each one supporting the open air. Priests moved through the spaces in silence, their shadows falling across pale limestone floors. The air shimmered with heat, and the smell of baked stone mingled with the sweetness of lotus and oil. To stand there was to stand within the god himself, a god that could not be seen, only felt. For ordinary Egyptians, this new vision of faith must have felt strange. The gods they had known all their lives, Amun, Osiris, Hathor, Thoth, were beings with faces and forms. They had temples, festivals, and priests who knew their rituals by heart. But the Aten had no face, no myth, no story. He was a presence. He did not dwell in the underworld or in statues of gold. He existed only in light, endless, impartial, and unreachable. Still, the change came slowly. The king did not yet abolish the old gods. He simply elevated the Aten. Officially, it was another form of devotion. Unofficially, it was the beginning of something that would transform the entire kingdom. The priests of Amun watched quietly, uncertain whether this was a passing enthusiasm or the start of a deliberate unmaking. Meanwhile, artisans were called to the capital to begin constructing new temples for the Aten. They worked with precision, quarrying limestone blocks, shaping columns, carving hieroglyphs into freshly plastered walls. The sound of chisels filled the air. Stone dust hung in the sunlight like fine mist. From morning until dusk, the workers built open courts where the king and queen could stand beneath the pure light of the sun. Each evening, as the work ended, the desert cooled and fell silent. The city returned to its steady pulse. Fires lit in small homes, women grinding grain, children laughing in courtyards. The Nile gleamed softly under the fading sky. To most, life remained unchanged, but in the palace, under the soft glow of oil lamps, Amenhotep IV and Nefertiti were preparing for something larger, a vision that would no longer fit within Thebes itself. For the Aten, they believed, was not bound to one city. He was everywhere the light touched. To honor him fully, a new place would be needed, a city built not in the shadow of the old gods, but in the heart of the rising sun. And so, in the quiet hours of planning and prayer, the idea of a new capital began to form, a city that would rise from the desert and face the dawn. Its name would be Akhetaten, the horizon of the Aten. But before this new city could be born, the king and queen would first have to step away from everything Egypt had ever known. Thebes, with its temples and memories, would have to be left behind. The priests of Amun would have to be silenced, and the kingdom would have to learn to worship the light itself. As the sun set over Thebes, the river reflected gold and crimson, and the stone walls glowed with the last warmth of day. The city slept beneath its gods, unaware that its own ruler was preparing to leave, to build a new world in the desert, a world of light where faith would be visible, and where a queen would stand equal beside her king. In that fading sunlight, the house of the Aten was only beginning, and with it, the first quiet steps toward disappearance, because every new beginning carries within it the seed of what will one day be lost. The desert waits quietly for those who seek to build upon it. Its horizon is a thin line between emptiness and eternity, a place where the sun rises without interruption and sets without resistance. Here, among the cliffs and pale sands, a new city would be born, a city unlike any that had ever existed in Egypt. It would be called Akhetaten, the horizon of the Aten. Around the 5th year of his reign, Amenhotep IV made a decision that startled his court and confused his people. He would leave Thebes, the great city of Amun, and build an entirely new capital in the middle of the desert. No temple stood there, no fields, no villages, no history. Just a stretch of untouched sand along a curve of the Nile, framed by cliffs that glowed gold in the morning light. To most Egyptians, it was nothing more than wilderness. To the king, it was sacred ground. He claimed the Aten had shown him this place, a natural amphitheatre of stone and sky where the sun could rise without shadow. The journey to build it began quietly, with surveyors measuring the land, marking lines in the sand with sticks and rope. Then came the labourers, thousands of them, carrying limestone, setting foundations, digging wells. From dawn to dusk, the desert rang with the sound of hammers and chisels. Blocks of white stone glared under the sun, the heat bending the air like glass. Men wiped sweat from their faces with linen rags. Water jars emptied quickly, and yet, day by day, the city began to take shape. Akhetaten was not built in secrecy, but in devotion. Every wall, every courtyard, every open temple was meant to honor the Aten. There were no dark sanctuaries here, only open spaces filled with light. The city stretched along the riverbank in a wide arc, its streets broad and straight, its buildings simple but bright. At its center stood the great temple of the Aten, vast and roofless, with altars arranged in long rows beneath the open sky. Offerings of bread, beer, and fruit would be laid directly in the sun's rays, where the warmth itself became a kind of blessing. Near the temple rose the royal palace, a series of long halls and airy courtyards, painted with images of the royal family and the Aten's rays descending upon them. Floors were covered with painted scenes of ponds and flowers, cranes and fish. Even inside, the illusion of sunlight and water surrounded them. The ceilings were painted with blue stars, reminders that even in the night, the sky was never far away. Nefertiti's presence could be felt everywhere. Her image appeared on the walls beside the king, equal in scale and dignity. She was shown wearing the blue crown, standing before the altars, or driving a chariot with ribbons streaming in the wind. Her daughters, 6 in all, were depicted playing at her feet, their small hands reaching toward her robes. It was not the distant formal art of the old temples. It was tender, human, alive. The queen was not only a consort, she was a partner in faith. The artists of Amarna worked differently from those who came before them. They no longer carved stiff, symmetrical figures. Instead, they showed movement, touch, even affection. The royal couple were shown holding hands, kissing their children, laughing beneath the rays of the sun. Their bodies were elongated, curved, natural. The king's face was no longer idealized. It was narrow, with heavy lips and long eyes. The queen's beauty was radiant, but real. This new art was not about perfection, it was about presence. The people of Egypt must have watched in quiet bewilderment as this new city rose. For centuries, the pharaoh had ruled from Thebes or Memphis, surrounded by temples to the old gods. Now, he lived among fresh-cut stone in a place with no past. Here, everything began again. Officials followed him reluctantly, scribes carrying tablets and scrolls, artisans bringing their tools, families moving into small mud-brick houses built hastily along the new streets. They called themselves the servants of the Aten, and each morning they awoke to the first light touching the desert cliffs, the light that was now their god. In the workshops, sculptors carved busts of the royal family for display and devotion. Among them was the one that would later become the most famous, Nefertiti's serene likeness, carved in limestone and painted with delicate precision. Her face was calm, her features balanced, her gaze steady. She embodied not only beauty, but stillness, the stillness of divine light. It was likely never meant for public eyes. Perhaps it was a model, a practice piece, but it would outlast them all. Life in Amarna was not as grand as its ideals. The city's construction was hurried. Streets filled with dust, houses small and quickly built. The heat was constant. Wells often ran low. Food had to be brought in from surrounding regions, carried by barges up the Nile. The workers' village was crowded and noisy, the homes built shoulder to shoulder. But the spirit of the place was unlike anywhere else, part city, part experiment, part hymn. For the royal family, it was paradise. Each morning, ceremonies greeted the sunrise. The king and queen appeared together, raising their hands to the Aten as music filled the air, harps, flutes, and chanting priests. The rays of the sun extended down upon them, ending in tiny hands that held symbols of life to their lips. Everything, from the way the palaces were arranged to the way prayers were sung, was designed to face east, toward the light. The city of Akhetaten was, in a sense, a mirror of the sun itself, brilliant, fragile, and short-lived. Its beauty depended on constant devotion, and devotion, like sunlight, could not be captured. It could only be followed. As the years passed, the city grew. The population expanded with officials, craftsmen, and servants. The archives filled with clay tablets, letters from foreign rulers asking for gold, for help, for attention. Many went unanswered. The king's focus had turned inward toward the light. The empire beyond the desert began to waver. Borders weakened. Vassal states pleaded for aid. But in Amarna, the sun still rose each morning, perfect and eternal. To walk its streets today, or what remains of them, is to feel the trace of a vanished idea. The outlines of walls still lie beneath the sand, faint but visible. The stone boundary stelae, carved into the cliffs, still proclaim the king's devotion to the Aten. He swore that he would never abandon this place, that his bones would rest here forever. And perhaps he believed that would be enough, that a city built for the sun would never fall into shadow. But all things built on light eventually face darkness. Even a city dedicated to eternity must yield to time. For now, though, in this chapter of the story, the horizon of the Aten still gleams. Its walls are white, its altars full. And the queen, radiant beside her king, walks beneath the morning sun, unaware that the same light that blesses her will one day erase her name. Because every sunrise begins the journey toward its own setting. The desert sun rises again, as it always does. Its first rays strike the white stone of Akhetaten, gliding over walls and courtyards, waking the silent streets with warmth rather than sound. Each day in the city begins the same way, with light. Light that falls not as decoration, but as command. Because here, light is the law. The cult of the Aten has grown. It is not a cult of secrecy or darkness, as many that came before. It has no hidden chambers, no secret chants whispered in shadowed halls. Its rituals are open, visible, public, enacted beneath the sun itself. The Aten does not dwell inside statues or behind temple walls. He lives in the air, in the daylight, in every beam that touches stone and skin. And so, the followers of the Aten live without concealment. Their faith has no shade. At the heart of this faith stands the royal family. Akhenaten and Nefertiti are not only rulers, they are intermediaries between the Aten and humanity, the bridge between radiance and dust. Images across the city show them together, the rays of the sun stretching down to touch their faces. At the end of each ray, tiny hands hold the symbol of life. The message is clear. The Aten gives life to all, but through them first. To worship the sun is to honor the king and queen who reflect its light. Each morning, as the horizon brightens, priests and attendants gather in the great temple. The temple is unlike any in Egypt. There are no ceilings to catch the sound of chants, no doorways to close. The entire structure stands open to the sky, its hundreds of offering tables aligned with mathematical precision. Jars of beer, loaves of bread, baskets of fruit, and garlands of flowers are carried in long processions. They are arranged so that when the sun climbs higher, its rays will strike the offerings directly. It is not the smell of incense that carries prayers to heaven. It is the warmth of the day itself. The ceremonies last for hours. Scribes record every item placed before the altars. Musicians play soft rhythms on flutes and harps, their melodies rising and fading with the heat. Officials bow in long rows, motionless except for the shimmer of sweat across their backs. When the king appears, the air seems to still. He stands with his arms lifted toward the sky, eyes half closed, the sunlight washing across his face. Beside him, Nefertiti mirrors the gesture. The gold on her collar catches the light like flame. Together, they embody devotion, not in words, but in posture. The people watch, and the people imitate. For in Amarna, worship has become choreography. Beyond the palace walls, daily life adapts to the rhythm of the sun. The people wake at dawn, work through the morning, and rest in the shaded hours of noon. In the afternoons, markets open along the main road, their stalls filled with linen, pottery, and baskets of dried dates. Children run barefoot through the dust. Artisans paint scenes on plaster walls, not of war or conquest, but of sunlight, flowers, and family. Even in the simplest homes, small offering tables are placed near windows so the light can fall upon them. Every beam becomes a blessing. Scribes labor in small rooms stacked with clay tablets, translating letters from foreign kings. They sit cross-legged, writing with steady precision as the heat presses against their backs. Most of the messages are formal and distant, requests for gold, for soldiers, for recognition. Many go unanswered. The king's attention has turned away from politics toward purity. In his vision, the Aten is not only a god, but a principle, the balance of order and light, the eternal motion of day into night. The empire beyond the desert begins to fade, but within Amarna, devotion brightens. Nefertiti's role grows even more visible. Her likeness appears beside the Aten's altars. She is painted making offerings, driving chariots, presiding over ceremonies. She is not merely present, she is powerful. Foreign ambassadors record her authority with careful respect. To many, she seems to rule alongside her husband, perhaps even in his place when he withdraws to pray. Her composure, always serene, becomes the human face of the Aten's order. If Akhenaten is the prophet, Nefertiti is the embodiment of the sun's grace. And yet, within this radiance, the edges of doubt begin to form. The old priests of Amun, displaced from Thebes, whisper in exile. Their temples are closed, their statues broken, their revenues cut off. The people who once worshipped Amun-Ra still remember his power. In distant provinces, they continue their prayers quietly. In Memphis, in Heliopolis, in the Delta, the old gods wait in silence, patient as stone. No decree can erase belief completely. Even the brightest sun cannot prevent the return of shadow. For now, the city continues its devotion. Every wall gleams with color. Every hymn praises the same source. Artists carve scenes of the royal daughters playing beneath the Aten's rays, their laughter frozen forever in painted stone. The wind carries the faint scent of bread from the altars, mingling with dust and heat. The air is alive with light. But faith is not only light, it is endurance, and endurance is tested in time. Soon, small cracks will begin to appear, not in stone, but in certainty, for every perfect image hides something unseen. And in Amarna, where everything is exposed to the sun, there is no shade for secrets to rest. What happens when a city built entirely on light begins to feel the need for shadow? The city of Akhetaten glows in the early light. Its walls shimmer with pale gold, the limestone bright against the stillness of the desert. Every morning begins the same way. The sound of sandals on the stone paths, servants carrying trays of bread and fruit, and the gentle call of musicians tuning their harps. Within the palace walls, the royal family awakens, a family unlike any Egypt has ever seen. Nefertiti and Akhenaten stand together at the heart of this devotion, surrounded by their 6 daughters. Each child bears a name that honors the Aten. Meritaten, the beloved of the Aten. Meketaten, the protected of the Aten. Ankesenpaten, she who lives through the Aten. The names themselves are prayers, written reminders that every breath belongs to the light. In painted reliefs across the walls of Amarna, the royal family appears again and again. They are shown not in war or judgment, but in moments of ordinary affection. The king lifts a child to his lips. The queen holds another in her arms. The rays of the Aten descend upon them all, ending in small hands that touch their faces. The scene repeats across palaces, tombs, and shrines, a family eternally together beneath the sun. It is an image of harmony, of intimacy, of divine closeness. But behind the warmth of the art lies the quiet order of ritual. Every gesture, every embrace is both real and symbolic. The royal children are not merely daughters. They are living extensions of the Aten-S creation, proof that life flows from the king and queen as light flows from the sun. Their movements are choreographed for ceremony, even play is performance, even laughter becomes part of devotion. Inside the palace, the air smells of oils and fresh plaster. The walls are painted with gardens, pools of lotus flowers, reeds swaying in the breeze, birds captured mid-flight. It is a vision of life, abundance, and endless sunlight. Servants move silently through the corridors, carrying basins of water for washing, trays of food for offering, scrolls of hymns for the morning ritual. Outside, the courtyards fill with guards and attendants, scribes waiting for instructions, artists bringing sketches to be approved. Every corner hums with quiet activity, every motion purposeful and measured. The royal daughters grow within this world of devotion and discipline. They wear light linen robes, their heads shaved smooth in the style of the royal children. Each has a small braid of hair at one side, a sign of youth. They learn to sing hymns to the Aten, to move gracefully during ceremonies, to stand still before the altars when their parents pray. They are adored, but also watched. Their lives belong not to themselves, but to the faith. Nefertiti remains the constant center. Her image appears in reliefs more frequently than any queen before her. She is shown standing alone before the Aten, offering flowers or incense, sometimes even smiting the enemies of Egypt, a gesture once reserved for kings. Her posture is calm, precise, symmetrical. She wears the tall blue crown, the same one Akhenaten wears in his own depictions. Their power is shared not only in image but in presence. Where he preaches devotion, she embodies it. Where he commands through vision, she sustains through grace. The people of Amarna see her as both queen and priestess, mother and goddess. They recite her name in morning prayers. They wear amulets bearing her likeness. They trust in her protection. In her, they see the reflection of the Aten's light in human form. Beautiful, unchanging, benevolent. Yet life within the royal palace, though radiant, carries the weight of isolation. The family is the center of a new religion that has cut itself off from the rest of Egypt. Outside Amarna, the temples of the old gods lie silent. Priests displaced from Thebes whisper in resentment. Farmers along the Nile still make offerings to Amun, Osiris, and Isis in secret. The Aten's light has not reached every home, and even in the city built for the sun, not every shadow disappears. Among the royal daughters, sickness begins to appear, faint at first, then unmistakable. Reliefs show Meketaten, the second daughter, fading from view. In one tomb scene, her image is smaller, weaker. In another, her parents stand before a couch, their gestures solemn. Historians believe she died young, perhaps in her early teens. The city mourned quietly. The Aten still rose, indifferent and complete. But within the palace, a silence deeper than devotion settled. It is in this silence that Nefertiti's strength becomes most visible. She continues her duties, appearing beside the king at every ceremony. She leads processions, oversees the temple rituals, comforts the people. Her composure never falters. She remains luminous, composed, untouchable. Her face carved in stone shows no sign of grief, only stillness. Perhaps that was the point. In a city dedicated to eternal light, emotion could not cast shadow. Outside the royal enclosures, the people of Amarna live ordinary lives. Artisans craft pottery and sculpture. Scribes copy hymns and correspondence. Children play in the dust between the houses. Women bake bread in clay ovens, the smell drifting through the streets. The hum of daily life continues, quiet and repetitive, like the sound of the Nile beyond the cliffs. The devotion of the city sustains them, not through miracles, but through habit. Faith becomes routine. Routine becomes survival. Each evening, as the sun sinks behind the western hills, the city softens. The limestone fades from gold to rose to grey. The air cools slightly. The sounds of work slow and fade. And as the last rays disappear, the priests of the Aten bow low, reciting the hymn that ends every day. The hymn is simple: gratitude for light, acceptance of darkness, and the promise that the sun will rise again. The family of the sun withdraws into the palace, their figures illuminated by the last reflections of evening. Inside, oil lamps flicker against painted walls, their small flames trembling as if unsure of their own right to exist in a city built for daylight. The queen walks slowly through the corridors, her silhouette passing between pillars. Her world is perfect, but perfection is never still for long. How long can a family live inside its own sunlight before the shadow becomes impossible to ignore? The city of Akhetaten stands in the center of the desert, like a reflection of the sun itself. It has no night in its design. Its temples are open to the sky, its walls painted with the brightness of day. Even the private rooms of the palace are filled with windows that allow sunlight to spill across the floors in long, deliberate lines. It is a city built not to rest, but to glow. When the sun rises, it touches everything. The broad avenue that runs through the city, the altars arranged in endless rows, the whitewashed houses of priests and officials. The streets wake slowly, the sound of sandals brushing over sand, the low murmur of prayers repeated by habit, the gentle clatter of clay jars being filled with water at the wells. Every motion belongs to the rhythm of the sun. In Akhetaten, there is no darkness to hide in and no need for secrecy, or so it seems. The days pass in repetition. At dawn, the offerings are placed before the altars: loaves of bread, jars of beer, bowls of fruit. By midday, the scent of heat and dust fills the air. At dusk, the last light disappears beyond the cliffs, and the city exhales, as if the Aten himself has taken leave until morning. But the Aten never truly leaves. He exists in the waiting, in the stillness of the hours before dawn. For the people of Amarna, life has become a pattern. Farmers tend small gardens by the river, watering the crops in silence. Scribes sit in shaded rooms, copying hymns that praise the Aten's perfection. Women grind grain into flour, their hands repeating motions taught by generations before them. Children learn to sing the morning prayers before they can write their own names. Everything in the city is ordered, measured, predictable. It is a place of faith, but also a place of fatigue. The Aten's priests walk through the courtyards, their linen robes gleaming in the sunlight. They carry fans, scrolls, and small boxes of incense. But unlike the priests of older gods, they do not perform in shadowed halls or speak of mysteries. Their worship is public, their ceremonies stripped of myth and secrecy. The Aten does not demand stories, only attention. And so, The city watches the sun as it moves, hour by hour, across the sky. To live in Amarna is to count time by light. The great royal palace remains the center of the city's existence. It is a vast complex of painted walls, wide courtyards, and open balconies overlooking the river. The floors are decorated with images of ponds and lotus blossoms, as if to remind the royal family of water in a land of heat. Servants move silently through the halls, carrying trays of food, scrolls of hymns, and messages from distant provinces. Most of the letters come from foreign rulers, from Babylon, from Mitanni, from Syria, each one written in the same polite desperation. They ask for aid, for gold, for soldiers. Many go unanswered. In Akhetaten, the concerns of the world beyond the desert seem far away, irrelevant beneath the unbroken sun. Nefertiti remains at Akhenaten's side, her image appearing on every wall and altar. The people call her Neferuaten Nefertiti. The beautiful one has come. Beautiful are the beauties of Aten. She stands beside her husband as equal, offering flowers and prayers, her hands raised to the same light. Her daughters stand behind her in orderly rows, symbols of harmony and divine lineage. Together, they form the living reflection of the sun's family. Radiant, serene, complete. But perfection has a quiet weight. The city's endless daylight leaves little room for rest. At night, when the torches are lit, the air feels thin, almost uncertain. Without the sun, Amarna seems unsure of itself. Its open temples become silhouettes. Its wide avenues stretch into silence. The priests retire to their quarters, the workers to their narrow homes. And in the brief coolness of the desert evening, the city that worships light finally touches darkness, but only for a moment. Archaeologists would later find the traces of this nightly pause. Oil lamps made of simple clay, their wicks burned short. Small household shrines tucked into corners, perhaps to gods long forbidden. Faint graffiti carved into walls, prayers not to the Aten, but to others, older and unnamed. Even in the city of pure devotion, human memory could not be erased entirely. Belief, like shadow, persists. Within the palace, the king continues to refine his vision. He orders hymns to be written, statues to be made, boundaries to be marked. He speaks of the Aten as the one true source of creation, the father and mother of all life. His words fill the inscriptions of the city, endless repetition of praise, each line a reflection of the one before it. In this repetition lies devotion, but also isolation. The city listens, but the world beyond it begins to turn away. The court officials whisper in private, uneasy at the neglect of foreign affairs. Soldiers stationed on the empire's borders write letters asking for reinforcements that never come. Merchants complain that trade has slowed, that caravans no longer arrive as often as before. But within the walls of Amarna, these voices are faint, carried away by the wind. The only sound that truly matters is the silence between the hymns, the stillness that follows each sunrise. For Nefertiti, the queen of this sunlit world, daily life remains an act of balance. She must be the perfect partner, the perfect mother, the perfect reflection of divine order. Her days are measured by ceremony, her gestures by precision. The weight of the crown presses lightly against her brow, but its meaning presses deeper still. To the people, she is both woman and symbol, a face of calm that holds the world together. But symbols do not sleep, and perfection, when stretched too far, begins to thin. The city without night continues to shine, day after day, season after season. Its walls catch the light, its courtyards fill with warmth, its river flows in quiet rhythm. It seems eternal, untouchable, immune to time. And yet, every brightness casts a faint edge of shadow, even if it goes unnoticed. The priests continue their hymns, the people continue their work, and the Aten continues his endless journey across the sky. But somewhere in that perfect light, a question begins to form. Quiet, invisible, but persistent. What happens to a city that refuses to see the night? The sun continues to rise above the desert. Each morning, it crosses the horizon with the same soft indifference, spreading light over the empty cliffs, the pale riverbank, and the white city that bears its name. Akhenaten still shines, but the shine has grown thin. The light is the same, but the people beneath it have changed. Years have passed since the first foundation stones were laid. The city that began as a vision now feels heavy with routine. The ceremonies remain precise, the offerings remain abundant, the hymns are still recited in unison. But devotion, repeated too long, becomes labor, and labor, when unending, becomes burden. The people of Amarna live beneath that burden quietly. They continue to build, to carve, to paint, to praise. Yet there is a stillness in their work, not of peace, but of exhaustion. The artisans who once shaped new forms of beauty now copy the same images again and again. The same scenes of the royal family, the same rays of the Aten, the same perfection repeated until the lines themselves begin to lose their life. The art remains graceful, but it no longer breathes. For those who live closest to the king, the change is most visible. Akhenaten's devotion has deepened into something that even his followers find difficult to understand. He speaks less of rule and more of purity. He withdraws from counsel, preferring to spend long hours in prayer, his face lifted toward the sky. He believes the Aten has revealed himself completely, that nothing beyond the light deserves attention, and in that belief, the world beyond Amarna fades. Letters from foreign lands continue to arrive. From vassal kings in Syria and Canaan, from merchants on the Mediterranean coast, from soldiers stationed along the borders. They all carry the same tone: uncertainty, anxiety, plea. Their messages pile up in the archives, written in the cuneiform script of diplomacy. Few are answered. The king's scribes note their arrival, seal them in clay, and move on. The empire that once stretched across deserts and seas begins to contract, slowly, invisibly. The Aten's light shines on the city, but not beyond it. Within the palace, the queen continues her duties. Nefertiti appears at every ceremony, her face composed, her gestures serene. She offers flowers, pours libations, recites hymns with a calm that never breaks. Her image is still carved beside the king, equal in height, equal in divinity. But fewer new depictions are made. The sculptors' workshops begin to slow. The materials arrive less frequently. Even the finest pigments, lapis, ochre, malachite, become harder to obtain. Trade routes have weakened, and with them, the colour of devotion begins to fade. Outside the royal district, the people of Amarna live their ordinary lives in quiet endurance. The summer heat grows harsher each year. Water levels in the wells fluctuate with the Nile's uncertain rhythm. Granaries stand half-filled. Food is rationed more carefully. Yet, each morning, the priests still line the temple courtyards, their robes gleaming white in the sun. The offerings are still made in abundance, for the Aten must never be neglected. And so, the burden of devotion falls hardest on those who have least to give. Faith, once a source of unity, begins to divide. Some whisper that the Aten is distant. Others cling more fiercely to the rituals, believing the sun will reward their persistence. But faith does not answer. It simply continues to rise and set, as it always has. Inside the archives, the king's scribes record everything. They write the hymns, the decrees, the inventories of grain and oil. They write lists of workers, lists of offerings, lists of the dead. Their clay tablets fill entire rooms, thousands upon thousands of words pressed into earth, preserved beneath the weight of devotion. They record the day when Nefertiti, the second royal daughter, dies. They note the ceremonies of mourning, the gifts to the priests, the offerings placed in her honor. They write it all down, neatly and without emotion. In the silence of their work, history becomes administration. Nefertiti's presence remains luminous, but there are fewer public appearances. Her name still appears on the stelae, but new inscriptions become rare. Some depict her alone, offering to the Aten without the king beside her. Others begin to omit her entirely. No one knows why. Perhaps she withdrew into ritual solitude. Perhaps she took on new duties beyond the reach of record. Perhaps the lines between devotion, faith, and rule had blurred beyond recognition. What is certain is that the queen who once embodied light begins to disappear into it. The city continues to function. The sun still rises. The priests still sing. The people still work. But beneath the surface, something has changed. The perfect rhythm no longer feels eternal. It feels endless, and there is a difference between the two. At night, the desert grows cool. The stars return, the only lights not sanctioned by the Aten. From the workers' village, small fires flicker. Families sit outside their doorways, sharing food, telling quiet stories. Stories of the old gods, the ones who walked among humans, who listened, who forgave. In Amarna, those names are forbidden. But in the dark, names are only whispers, and whispers do not leave marks. The priests do not speak of it. The scribes do not record it. The king does not acknowledge it. But even in the city built for the sun, the night has begun to return, slowly, invisibly, inevitably. The cost of devotion is not measured in stone or gold. It is measured in the silence that follows too much certainty, in the stillness of faith when it stops asking questions, and in the fading color of a world that no longer remembers why it began to worship. As the moon rises above the cliffs of Amarna, its pale light touches the same walls that once gleamed with the fire of the sun. The city still stands, but its brilliance has become delicate, the kind of beauty that trembles at the edge of endurance. And as the night deepens, a quiet question moves through the empty streets, through the courtyards, through the painted halls where the queen once walked. Can a city built for eternal daylight survive the very thing that makes it human? The return of darkness. You wake to another sunrise over Amarna. The city is the same. The hills are pale, the walls white. The river glimmers softly in the morning haze. The Aten rises once again, unchanging, indifferent. But something, someone, is missing. At first, no one says it aloud. The queen, Nefertiti, is absent from the morning rituals. Her name is still carved in the stones. Her image still appears beside the king. But in the courtyards where her presence once commanded the light, there is only silence. No procession. No offerings led by her hand. Only the priests, their chants rising in the same rhythm as always, pretending that nothing has changed. The sculptors, who once shaped her likeness daily, notice first. The royal workshops, once filled with the careful clink of chisels and the dust of limestone, grow quiet. Orders no longer come from the palace. The master artisans, like Thutmose, the man whose hands once captured her face in flawless stone, wait, uncertain. They clean their tools, adjust the unfinished statues, and wonder if their queen will ever sit for them again. In the records that survive, her name begins to thin. One inscription stops using her title. Another replaces her cartouche with a blank space. Later, carvings omit her entirely. It is not an erasure done in haste or hatred. It is quieter than that. It feels more like neglect, as if her presence had slowly drifted beyond the reach of stone. Some scholars, thousands of years later, will argue that she died. Others will suggest she changed her name and ruled in secret. But in her own time, no explanation was recorded. Only the silence remains, and the silence is complete. In Amarna, life continues. The ceremonies still occur at dawn. Akhenaten still appears before the Aten, still raises his arms, still praises the light that sustains all life. But even in devotion, something seems diminished. Without the queen beside him, the ritual feels uneven, like a song missing its harmony. The people, too, begin to feel the absence. They remember her as the intercessor, the visible grace of the royal family. Her kindness was quiet, but constant. She was said to walk among the courtyards, speaking softly with attendants, offering fruit or perfume to the workers' wives. She was the presence that humanized the divine, the connection between the distant radiance of the Aten and the dust of the people's lives. Now, that connection has faded. The priests continue their routines with even greater precision. The king, perhaps aware of the void, intensifies the cult. Every day grows more elaborate in ritual, more demanding in formality. Yet, devotion without warmth feels like shadow without substance. It holds its shape, but not its meaning. In the distant archives, the letters from foreign lands grow more desperate. They speak of revolts in the north, of lost trade routes, of enemy advances. They ask for gold, for troops, for reassurance. No answers come. The king's attention has narrowed to the horizon of the sun, and within that light, there is no place for the noise of the world. Inside the palace, the corridors remain polished, the air perfumed. But the rhythm of daily life has shifted. Some courtiers speak in whispers. Others look away. No one knows whether the queen has died, or whether she lives elsewhere under another name. Some say she has become Nefertiti, a co-ruler in secrecy. Others say she has withdrawn into the inner temples, unseen even by the priests. And a few, quietly, suggest something simpler, that she has simply been forgotten, as the living sometimes are when the sun shines too brightly on one man's devotion. The tombs carved into the cliffs tell part of the story. In one, the murals show the royal family together, Akhenaten, Nefertiti, and their daughters. In another, painted later, her image is gone. Her place is empty. The figures still face the Aten, but the symmetry is broken. Where once there were two rays of sunlight touching two royal faces, now there is only one. Even the artisans, long trained to follow exact royal patterns, hesitate. Without a queen, the art loses its balance. The faces they carve seem less alive, the poses less natural. The grace that once defined the Amarna style begins to stiffen, returning slowly to the rigid forms that came before it. In this way, the disappearance of one woman begins the slow end of an entire artistic revolution. As months pass, the records grow thinner, decrees become rare, reliefs go unfinished, temples are left incomplete. The rhythm that once felt eternal now falters, like the last breath of a long-held prayer. Beyond Amarna, the old gods begin to stir again. Whispers reach the countryside that the Aten city is losing favor, that the traditional gods are returning. The priests of Amun, long silenced, begin to gather in secret. Change is coming, not with rebellion, but with quiet endurance, the kind that waits patiently until time restores what devotion erased. In the archives, a final letter arrives from a distant governor. He pleads for assistance, warning that the empire is falling apart. There is no reply. The record ends there. The next tablet bears another date, another hand, and a different ruler's name. Nefertiti's final days are not written. Her resting place has never been found. No tomb bears her full titles. No inscriptions mourn her death. And yet, she remains one of the most enduring faces in history. Not for what is known, but for what was lost. In the silence of her absence, the desert reclaims her memory. Wind moves through the city's empty courtyards, carrying dust over broken altars. The sunlight that once defined her glory now softens into the same gold that falls on all forgotten things. Sometimes when archaeologists uncover fragments of her image, a piece of a cheek, a curve of a crown, a trace of paint still clinging to stone, it feels as though the earth itself remembers her, even if history does not. Each fragment is a whisper from a vanished world, a reminder that not all disappearances are sudden. Some are gradual, like the fading of color, the erosion of light, the slow retreat of memory into sand. And as the sun sets behind the cliffs of Amarna, the city glows one last time. For a moment, the stones remember her. The rays fall exactly where they once fell, across the doorways she passed, across the walls that bore her image. Then the light shifts, the shadow lengthens. The queen, who once embodied the light of the world, disappears again, quietly, completely, and without a trace. History does not record the moment she vanished. It only records that she did, and perhaps that is all that can ever be said of her. Still, one question remains, unspoken, persistent, and unanswerable. When light becomes too perfect to share, does it inevitably destroy the one who first carried it?
The city of Amarna was built for eternity. Its stones were laid in straight lines that aligned with the horizon. Its walls were smooth and white, meant to reflect the Aten's unbroken light. Its streets were wide and ordered, as if geometry itself could promise permanence. But eternity, it seems, has its own sense of time. Years pass, the desert winds grow stronger. The brightness of the paint fades. The gold that once adorned the temples begins to dull. The people still live and work, but their numbers begin to thin. The vision that once felt unshakable begins to tremble beneath the weight of neglect. When Nefertiti's name disappears from the records, so too does much of the devotion that gave the city its life. Without her, the rituals feel heavier. The energy that once animated the altars now feels distant, mechanical. The people perform their duties, but their eyes drift toward the horizon, toward Thebes, toward the old gods, toward the memories of a time when Egypt's faith was broader than the sun alone. In the royal palace, Akhenaten's solitude deepens. He continues to speak of the Aten's perfection, but his words carry a faint echo now. Even the courtiers who listen nod with the careful politeness of those who know they cannot question but no longer believe. The once vibrant heart of Amarna beats softly, like the fading pulse of a great idea that has outlived its creator's certainty. Outside the city walls, the Nile continues its slow and indifferent rhythm. Each year, the floodwaters rise and fall. Each year, they bring new silt to the fields downstream, fields now tilled by farmers who remember the names Akhenaten forbade. In the quiet villages of Middle Egypt, old prayers begin to reappear. Amen. Osiris, Isis. The names whispered under breath are the same ones once carved out of temples. Faith, like the river, finds its own course again. In Amarna, the temples still stand. Each dawn, the priests step into the courtyards, their white linen glowing against the pale stone. They raise their arms to the sun, they chant the same hymns, they offer the same bread and beer, but their voices carry less conviction now. The offerings feel like obligation. The sunlight no longer feels sacred, it feels heavy. What was once worship has become routine. The workers' village, carved into the desert slope behind the city, tells another story. The small homes, once filled with laughter, are half empty. Tools lie abandoned. The kilns cool faster each evening. In the narrow alleys, dust gathers where children once played. A city without faith is not a city without people, but it is a city without reason. Akhenaten still issues decrees. He orders repairs to the temples, new hymns to be written, new monuments to be carved. But the workforce is smaller, the stone supply less certain, and the devotion that once built Amarna no longer runs through its veins. The Aten shines above, but his followers have learned that sunlight, however bright, cannot fill an empty stomach. The foreign lands that once sent tribute begin to send rebellion instead. Outposts fall. Messengers bring troubling news that goes unanswered. The empire that Egypt once held together begins to unravel, thread by thread, while the king remains fixated on the perfection of a single god. Beyond Amarna's walls, the world grows restless. Inside, the king grows quiet. There are few records from these years, fewer still that survive. Perhaps the scribes stopped writing. Perhaps the tablets were lost to neglect. What remains are fragments, a partial hymn, a list of rations, a record of a burial. Each fragment carries the faint scent of ending. One day the royal household changes again. A new name appears on the monuments, Smenkhkare. Cruel or young, mysterious. His origin uncertain, his reign brief. Some believe he was the king's son. Others think he was the queen herself, returning in another form. The truth, as always, dissolves into the sand. The years that follow blur together. Inscriptions grow sparse. The city, still brilliant under the desert sun, begins to hollow from within. Houses collapse. The plaster peels. The roads erode. And slowly and perceptibly, people begin to leave. No rebellion drives them away. No decree forbids their stay. They simply drift back toward the river, back toward the heart of Egypt, back toward the gods who had never entirely vanished. Amarna, the city of light, is left to the silence it was built upon. When the king dies, and he does, quietly, without witness, no great funeral procession fills the streets. No choirs sing his hymns. The priests perform their duties as written, but there is no joy in it. The Aten's rays still shine upon his tomb, but they fall on empty stone. There is no record of where his body rests now. His sarcophagus lies broken, his name defaced, his tomb robbed by time itself. The city lingers a little longer, kept alive by routine, then fades completely. The priests leave. The workers vanish. The walls begin to crack. The desert, patient and soundless, begins to reclaim what was always its own.
Years later, the new pharaoh returns to the old gods. Temples are reopened. The names of Amun and Osiris are spoken freely once more. The Aten is not forgotten, but he is no longer feared. He becomes a symbol of one man, s impossible dream, to bind the universe to a single light and to live within it without shadow. The people call the abandoned city Akhetaten no longer. They call it Amarna, a name without meaning, a name that belongs only to ruin. The white stones turn grey. The carved faces crumble. The inscriptions lose their colour, their form, their sound. Only the desert remembers, and the desert tells no stories. Centuries pass. The Nile changes course. Dynasties rise and fall. The memory of Akhenaten and Nefertiti fades into the dust of forgotten dynasties. And yet, when the sandstorms sweep across the cliffs of Amarna, they uncover fragments. The corner of a relief, the curve of a hand, the trace of paint on stone. Each piece is a breath from a lost world, a whisper that once believed it could outshine death itself. Amarna was not destroyed by war or fire. It simply stopped being believed in. And perhaps that is the quietest kind of ending there is. The Aten still rises over the eastern horizon each day. The sunlight still touches the cliffs where the city once stood. But the light is indifferent now. It shines not for kings, not for queens, not for temples or hymns, only for the endless rhythm of time itself. The city that was built for eternity has become part of it. And eternity, it seems, has no memory of names. Still, as the sun lifts higher, a single question drifts across the empty stones. When devotion fades, does what remains become ruin or remembrance? After the king's death, the desert was silent. The temples of the Aten stood empty, their courtyards filled with wind instead of prayer. The white walls of Amarna reflected the sunlight one last time, and then began to crumble quietly. The city that once declared itself eternal became a hollow echo. And yet, even after silence falls, history does not stop. It shifts, it changes shape, it finds new hands to carry it forward. Those hands were small, the hands of a child. Somewhere near the end of Akhenaten's reign, a boy had been born. His name was Tutankhaten. He was perhaps 8 or 9 years old when the city began to fade. Too young to remember the beginning of the great experiment, too young to understand its end. And yet, through him, Egypt would remember again. When the boy became king, the court moved quietly back to Thebes. The royal processions were modest, the ceremonies restrained. There were no proclamations of triumph, no speeches of return. Only a slow reawakening of what had once been lost. The people called him Tutankhaten, the living image of Aten. But not for long. The priests who had waited patiently through years of exile now stepped forward again. The temples of Amun reopened. The statues, long hidden or broken, were restored, and the young king, barely old enough to read the prayers written in his name, became the symbol of restoration. His name was changed from Tutankhaten to Tutankhamun, the living image of Amun. One letter altered, one god replaced, an empire restored. In the records, the change appears gradual, bureaucratic, and calm. There is no mention of anger, no declaration of revenge. The old gods returned not through conquest, but through persistence, the kind that waits silently until time comes back around. The priests resumed their duties as if they had never been interrupted. The rituals continued where they had stopped 17 years before. The hymns to Amun rose again over the waters of the Nile, soft and ancient, as though the years of the Aten had been no more than a mirage. And yet, the legacy of Amarna lingered. The city itself stood empty, but its memory cast a long, quiet shadow. The art, the language, the very idea of a single divine light. These things did not vanish completely. They left traces in the minds of those who had seen them, in the hands of artists who remembered the curve of a human face drawn in honest proportion, in the simplicity of prayers that reached towards something unseen. The boy king grew up surrounded by these contradictions. The court around him was filled with older men, advisors, generals, scribes, priests, each carrying the memory of the 18 years like a scar they could not show. They guided him gently, shaping his reign into a restoration of the old world. He signed decrees he did not fully understand. He sat upon a throne designed for a man, not a child. He smiled for ceremonies that had been repeated for 1,000 years. In him, Egypt saw its youth again, a renewal after a long and uneasy experiment. In the temples, craftsmen carved his likeness in stone, this time beside Amun, beside Mut, beside the gods of tradition. They painted him wearing the blue crown of war, though no wars were fought. They wrote hymns to him, though his voice was rarely heard. He became both real and symbolic. A boy whose brief reign stood for the endurance of a civilization that refused to forget itself. Meanwhile, Amarna slept. Its avenues filled with sand. Its painted walls grew pale. The houses of its priests collapsed under their own weight. The temples that once blazed in sunlight were left roofless beneath the stars. The desert erased the details, but not the outline. Even abandoned, Amarna remained what it had always been. A dream in stone, too fragile for the world that surrounded it. The young king's life was short, perhaps 10 years, perhaps less. He died before reaching 20, leaving behind only fragments of his reign, a few inscriptions, a handful of artifacts, a tomb that was meant for someone else. But that tomb, small and hastily prepared, would outlast empires. When modern archaeologists uncovered it, more than 3,000 years later, they found his name preserved in gold. Tutankhamun, the boy who restored the old gods, the king who inherited the sun and returned it to the heavens. And through that rediscovery, the world remembered not only him, but the one who came before, Akhenaten, and through him, Nefertiti. The Aten's light had faded, but not disappeared. It survived in the very idea that truth, however small or flawed, can change the shape of belief. The sun itself had never chosen sides. It had only watched, as it always does, rising over devotion and ruin alike. In the quiet rooms of the restored temples, priests once again performed the rituals that had defined Egypt for centuries. They offered incense to Amun, poured wine for Osiris, lit lamps for the gods of the underworld. But somewhere deep within the human heart, perhaps a faint memory of another kind of faith lingered, the kind that looked up to the sky and saw divinity not in form or image, but in light alone. The boy king's death closed the last page of that fragile chapter. After him came new rulers, new dynasties, new ambitions. Akhenaten's name was erased from monuments. His statues were smashed. His city was left to vanish beneath the sand. And for centuries, Egypt pretended he had never existed. But time is not loyal to silence. It keeps its own records, written not in ink or stone, but in memory. And memory, like the sun, always returns. Today, the boy king is known across the world. His golden mask, his treasures, his tomb, all reminders of a civilization's power and of one family's strange and fragile attempt to redefine the divine. Yet behind that glittering legacy lies a quieter truth. That history is not made only by triumphs or wars, but by faith, by what people choose to believe, and by what they cannot sustain. As the night falls over the desert once more, the ruins of Amarna rest beneath the stars. The sand moves softly over its streets. The wind hums through its broken columns. And the same moon that once shone upon Akhenaten, Nefertiti, and Tutankhamun still hangs above, silent and impartial, illuminating what remains of a vanished light, because in the end, even the sun must set. And what endures is not its brightness, but the memory of those who once tried to hold it. You are standing before a wall of stone. Its surface, once covered in carved hieroglyphs, now bears deep scratches. The outlines of figures have been chipped away, leaving behind empty silhouettes, ghosts of names and faces deliberately removed from memory. This is where the story turns from mystery into silence, because what you are seeing is not erosion, it is erasure. Someone, long ago, wanted to make sure Nefertiti never existed. In the years following Akhenaten's death, Egypt found itself in turmoil. The capital city of Amarna, once filled with hymns to the Aten, began to decay. Temples to the sun god were abandoned. Workshops that once crafted elegant alabaster statues now stood quiet, their doors sealed with desert dust. The royal palace, where laughter and music once echoed, became a hollow shell of plaster and gold. And in this slow collapse, a single, haunting question spread among the people. What happened to the great queen? You can almost imagine the priests in Thebes whispering, the scribes hesitating before writing her name, the sculptors told to chip away her image from the temple walls. It was as if Egypt itself decided that Nefertiti, the woman who had dared to stand beside a heretic king, must be removed from the story. We know, from fragments, that her statues were broken deliberately, some smashed at the neck, a symbolic gesture, as if to cut off her power. Others buried in pits behind temples, their eyes gouged out, their features defaced. It was not mere vandalism, it was political cleansing. Because to erase Nefertiti was to erase the memory of Akhenaten IS revolution, the worship of the Aten, the city of Amarna, and the years of religious rebellion. In Egyptian belief, memory was immortality. To be remembered was to live forever. To be forgotten was to die a second death. And so, for Nefertiti, this erasure was more than symbolic. It was spiritual execution. But there is something strange in the pattern of her disappearance. Because while her images were defaced, her name was not always removed. In some places, it remained untouched, faint but visible, as if someone had hesitated. A chisel paused mid-stroke, a scribe unwilling to cross out the name of a queen who once ruled as pharaoh. Archaeologists have debated for decades what this means. Was her memory hated or protected? Did she vanish in disgrace, or was she hidden away? Her tomb kept secret by loyal followers. One theory suggests that after Akhenaten's death, Nefertiti ruled Egypt herself, under the name Neferuaten, the mysterious co-regent mentioned in a few scattered inscriptions. In those texts, the ruler speaks with authority, giving orders to foreign kings, signing royal decrees. But the titles are ambiguous, some written with feminine endings, some without. Enough to spark centuries of debate. If this co-regent truly was Nefertiti, then for a brief flickering moment, she was pharaoh in her own right, a woman who ruled not beside a man, but as one, and then vanished completely. Later, Tutankhaten, the boy king who would become Tutankhamun, took the throne. Under his advisors, Egypt's gods returned. The temples of the Aten were torn down. The city of Amarna was abandoned to the sand, and the royal line rewrote its story. Akhenaten's name was chiseled away. Nefertiti's likeness erased. Their family's memory condemned in what the Egyptians called damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of memory. You can almost feel the quiet weight of it, the sound of chisels echoing in stone corridors, the workers sweating under torchlight as they carve out faces that once smiled from the walls. The silence after the hammer falls, when a name that once carried divine power becomes dust. But even in erasure, something survived. Because the statues could not all be found. The portraits could not all be broken. Some were hidden, buried beneath collapsed walls, locked in sealed rooms where no one dared to look. And centuries later, when the sands shifted again, her face returned, serene, composed, unbroken. The bust of Nefertiti, discovered in 1912, looked almost impossibly alive, as if she had waited for 3,000 years to be remembered again. But her disappearance remains unsolved. No tomb has been found, no mummy identified. Only fragments, like whispers, bits of text, broken statues, and a single perfect face that somehow escaped oblivion. And so, as the desert wind sweeps through the ruins of Amarna, carrying sand across the buried streets and silent doorways, one can't help but wonder, was her erasure truly successful? Or did Nefertiti, the woman who defied gods and kings alike, find a way to outlive her own destruction? Because in the end, even forgotten names can rise again, if the right eyes rediscover them. Imagine a quiet valley beneath the unrelenting Egyptian sun, a place of silence, of deep-cut stone and hidden chambers. This is the Valley of the Kings, where pharaohs sought to sleep undisturbed for eternity. Each tomb here was a promise to the gods and a plea for memory. Yet, in this sacred landscape, there lies a mystery that has never truly rested. A mystery that whispers a name, long thought erased: Nefertiti. The year is 2015. Archaeologists from around the world gather around a single wall inside the tomb of Tutankhamun, a tomb once thought fully explored. But a British Egyptologist, Nicholas Reeves, notices something strange. On a digital scan of the tomb's walls, faint linear outlines appear beneath the painted plaster. Two shapes, doorways, sealed long ago. To most eyes, the wall is just that, a wall. But to Reeves, it looks like a false partition. And beyond it, he believes, lies another chamber. One that does not belong to Tutankhamun at all. He calls it the hidden tomb of Nefertiti. You can imagine the hush that followed. For nearly a century, the tomb of the boy king had been treated as complete. Every inch mapped, photographed, and measured. Yet suddenly, a possibility emerged that another queen, the most famous of all, might still lie beyond that painted wall, untouched for over 3,000 years. It seems improbable, and yet not impossible, because Tutankhamun's tomb itself was peculiar. It was unusually small for a king. Its design, narrow corridors, sharp turns, and modest size, more fitting for a queen. The walls appear hastily painted, as if prepared in a rush. And deep in the plaster, under layers of decoration, some scholars believe they can see earlier outlines, shapes of figures and inscriptions that once belonged to another. Could it be that Tutankhamun's burial chamber was once part of Nefertiti's? Was the young king laid to rest in the queen's tomb when death came too suddenly to build his own? The logic is tempting. After Akhenaten's death, Egypt was in chaos. The royal family was fractured, temples desecrated, loyalties uncertain. When Tutankhamun died unexpectedly, there may have been no time to carve a new resting place, and so they may have opened the sealed tomb of the former queen, Nefertiti, reused a portion of it, and concealed the rest. But to follow this trail, you must step back into the sand centuries earlier, to the time when tombs were carved not for kings, but for the gods they claimed to be. The artisans who built them lived in a village called Deir el-Medina, hidden behind the cliffs. Their work was sacred, their secrets protected. They carved through limestone by torchlight, knowing every stroke might be seen only by the dead and the divine. And sometimes they were ordered to seal off chambers forever. So perhaps, somewhere beyond Tutankhamun's painted wall, one such chamber remains, a hidden tomb that should not exist. A tomb that holds a woman erased from history. Over the years, technology has tried to uncover what lies beyond that wall. Radar scans have been conducted, thermal imaging has been used, micro cameras lowered through small holes in the plaster. Each time, The results contradict one another. Some scans detect voids, shapes that could be rooms. Others find only solid rock. The evidence bends and shifts like the desert heat. And still, the wall stands, unbroken, unopened. The Egyptian authorities, cautious and proud, refused to allow excavation unless certainty could be proved. And so, the mystery remains sealed, as if the desert itself is protecting its last secret. Yet, even uncertainty tells a story. Because the mere idea of Nefertiti's tomb, hidden beside the boy king, reignited a fascination with her legacy. It reminded the world that history is not fixed. It is layered, and sometimes the truth lies inches away, just beyond the reach of our tools, behind a wall painted thousands of years ago. If that hidden chamber does exist, and if it truly belonged to Nefertiti, what might it contain? Perhaps a sarcophagus, untouched since the day it was sealed. Jewelry glinting faintly in the dark. Paintings still bright beneath the limestone dust. And maybe, just maybe, her face, serene as the bust that bears her likeness. But what would it mean to find her now, after 3 millennia of silence? Would uncovering her resting place bring peace to her memory, or disturb a story she wanted to leave behind? Because every discovery comes with a price. Every door opened changes the past a little more, and maybe that is why, even now, the desert keeps its silence. The wall remains intact. The Queen's secret, unconfirmed. Her disappearance, unresolved. And as the light fades over the Valley of the Kings, the question lingers in the cooling air. If Nefertiti truly lies behind that wall, will we ever be ready to find her? The city of Amarna still sleeps. You can almost hear the silence when you stand there, the hush of a place once alive with voices, now claimed by wind and sand. There are no crowds, no chariots, no music echoing through courtyards anymore. Only broken columns and faint outlines of walls, scattered across a plateau that looks out toward the Nile. This was once Akhenaten, the horizon of the Aten, the city Nefertiti and Akhenaten built for their god of light. It rose quickly, as if conjured by devotion alone. Tens of thousands of workers carved homes and temples out of the desert, stone by stone. The royal palace shimmered in the sun. The great temple of the Aten stood wide and open to the sky, filled with offerings and prayers to the radiant disk. And for a few fleeting years, this city was the center of the world. Every decree, every festival, every hymn began here. The Aten was praised as the giver of life, and Nefertiti, radiant in her crown, was the living symbol of divine beauty. But now, when you walk through its ruins, the desert stretches endlessly. The sand has softened everything. Walls that once held murals of gold and blue now crumble into pale dust. The river that once shimmered beside its gardens has changed its course, leaving the ancient docks stranded far from water. Time has done what politics began. It has erased Amarna's heartbeat. Archaeologists who come here today describe it as haunting. The air feels heavy, as if the city still carries the memory of devotion and loss. There are traces of paint on fallen stones, footprints pressed into ancient floors, and fragments of pottery scattered like forgotten sentences. And among these fragments, small pieces of ordinary life emerge. A child's clay toy, a wooden comb, a scribble of hieratic script left by a worker in haste. A grocery list, perhaps, or a private thought he never imagined someone would read thousands of years later. Each piece is a whisper from a vanished world, a world built for the sun and abandoned to the dark. When the capital was moved back to Thebes after Akhenaten's death, the exodus was quick. Families left behind their homes, their tools, their daily lives. Temples were sealed. Streets, once filled with laughter, fell silent overnight. Even the royal tombs, carved deep into the cliffs east of the city, were left unfinished. It's said that the priests of Amun, returning to power, cursed Amarna by neglecting it. No one rebuilt it. No one reoccupied it. For centuries, it was left to decay in the open air, a scar of heresy on the Egyptian landscape. And yet, as centuries passed, the desert preserved it better than any temple. Amarna became a time capsule of daily life, untouched by later hands. Not just a record of royal grandeur, but of ordinary existence, of bread baked, linen woven, water drawn from wells. When modern archaeologists uncovered the city, they found something rare. Not just monuments to gods, but kitchens, workshops, bedrooms. Evidence of the people who lived under Nefertiti's reign. It told a story that the temples never wrote down, of how belief reshaped the rhythms of life, how devotion changed what people ate, how they built, even how they buried their dead. And through all of it, you can still feel her presence. In the lines of art, the symmetry of the statues, the gentle curve of her likeness on broken reliefs. She may have vanished, but her city remains an echo of her will. Some say Amarna was cursed. Others believe it was sacred, too pure, too idealistic to survive. But maybe it was something simpler. Maybe it was just human, the result of a dream too fragile to endure in the world of politics and sandstorms. As the sun sets over the plateau, the stones of Amarna seem to glow softly, as if remembering what they once were. The shadows lengthen, stretching across courtyards where musicians once played, and children once ran barefoot through dust. And when night falls, the moonlight paints the ruins silver. It is quiet again, the kind of quiet that feels alive. You can almost imagine her there, Nefertiti, standing on a terrace, looking over her city one last time, the wind tugging at her veil, the desert before her, endless and golden. Perhaps she knew it would all fade. Perhaps she built it not for eternity, but for a moment of perfect light. And in that thought, that fleeting belief, lies the strange beauty of Amarna's sleep, because even in ruin, it remains faithful to its name. The horizon of the Aten, still glowing faintly beneath the sand, still whispering the memory of a queen who refused to vanish completely. But if her city still sleeps, does her spirit sleep with it? Or does she still wait, somewhere beyond the dunes, for the world to find her again? For more than 3,000 years, Nefertiti's name drifted through silence. Her temples were destroyed, her statues shattered, her tomb lost to the desert. The ancient world forgot her completely. And then, in the winter of 1912, she came back. It happened in the ruins of Amarna, in a half-buried workshop once belonging to a royal sculptor named Thutmose. The air was still, heavy with dust. German archaeologist Ludwig Borchardt and his team had been digging for weeks, uncovering fragments of statues, broken tablets, and small household relics. It was not a glamorous sight, just another pile of debris from Egypt's long-forgotten heretic capital. Then, on a quiet December morning, as workers cleared a corner of the workshop, something emerged from the sand. Not gold, not treasure, but a face, perfectly carved, delicate, almost breathing. When they lifted it from the dust, even the hardened workers fell silent. The sunlight struck its surface, and for a moment, the workshop seemed to glow. Before them stood a portrait so lifelike, so graceful, that it felt less like an artifact and more like a memory made visible. Nefertiti, the beautiful one, has come. Her features were serene, long neck, high cheekbones, symmetrical lips curved in a faint, knowing smile. The blue crown rested elegantly on her head, its color still vivid after 30 centuries. One eye, inlaid with quartz and black pigment, gazed outward. The other, unfinished, as if the sculptor had paused mid-creation, intending to return. He never did. That face, half complete, half eternal, became one of the most recognizable images in the history of archaeology. It was not just beauty, it was presence. As if, after centuries of silence, the Queen had chosen this moment to look upon the world again. Borchardt knew immediately what he had found. In his diary that evening, he wrote only a few words. Description is useless. It must be seen. The bust was taken to Cairo, photographed, and quietly transported to Germany, under the legal agreements of the time. It would eventually become the centerpiece of Berlin's Neues Museum, unveiled to the public years later. And when people first saw her, they were stunned. Thousands came to look upon that face, to see the woman who had ruled beside Akhenaten, the queen who had vanished from all records. Even in stillness, she seemed alive. Her expression, calm, intelligent, untouchable, challenged the very idea of time. For historians, the bust was more than a work of art. It was evidence. It proved that Nefertiti was real, not a myth, not an invention of later generations. Her face showed a level of individuality unseen in most Egyptian sculpture, a reflection of the Amarna period's fascination with realism, humanity, and divine grace. But for others, the rediscovery stirred a deeper emotion. It was not just about history, it was about resurrection. The idea that a woman erased from the world could return, her gaze unchanged, her beauty undimmed. You can almost imagine the sculptor, Thutmose, working in his quiet studio 3 millennia ago. The sound of his chisel against limestone, the steady rhythm of creation, the sunlight spilling in through the doorway as he shaped her likeness with reverence, perhaps under her very gaze. Maybe she stood there once, watching him work, smiling faintly, unaware that this piece of stone would one day outlast her kingdom, her city, even her name. When you look into the bust's surviving eye, you can almost feel that weight of eternity, a single gaze that crossed time, a silent defiance of erasure. The rediscovery of Nefertiti's face changed how the world saw ancient Egypt. Until then, history had largely been written in stone, gods, kings, battles, and hieroglyphs. But Nefertiti's face introduced something else: emotion, individuality, a human presence that could not be reduced to myth or inscription. Yet her return also sparked conflict. Germany claimed her as theirs. Egypt demanded her back. For more than a century, the two nations have quietly debated where she truly belongs. In Berlin, where she has become a global icon, or in Egypt, where her spirit was born. And through all the politics, she remains still, unmoved, perfectly calm. She has been studied, scanned, replicated in 3D. Every pigment, every brushstroke analyzed, and still, she keeps her secret. The faint asymmetry of her smile, the mystery in her half-finished eye. No matter how close we look, we never find the person behind the perfection. Perhaps that is why she fascinates us so deeply. Because the bust does not just show us her face, it shows us what time cannot erase. And as you stand before her, even today, you might feel a strange quiet settle over you. The same stillness that must have filled Thutmose's workshop, the same calm that drifts over the ruins of Amarna, the same unbroken silence that has followed her through 3,000 years of history. It is the silence of memory returning, softly, slowly, like the breath of the past. Nefertiti was meant to be forgotten. And yet, here she is, alive in color and form, gazing into eternity, as if waiting for someone to remember her story fully. But perhaps the truer question is not how she was found, but why she allowed herself to be seen again.
When her face resurfaced, so did the questions. For centuries, Nefertiti was a ghost, a name whispered through broken hieroglyphs and forgotten prayers. Then, in the stillness of Thutmose's workshop, she appeared again, lifelike, radiant, unshaken by time. But with her return came a flood of speculation. Because the more we looked at that face, the less certain we became of who Nefertiti really was. Was she a queen or a pharaoh? A goddess? Or a carefully constructed symbol? A woman of power or a face crafted to hide something deeper? The rediscovery of the bust in 1912 didn't end the mystery of Nefertiti. It began it anew. Historians, archaeologists, and dreamers all found themselves caught in the same quiet puzzle. Why did she vanish so completely? And what did her serene, perfect image truly mean? Theories multiplied like desert stars. Some scholars believed the bust was only a model, a teaching piece for apprentices to study the ideal proportions of beauty. That would explain the missing eye, the unfinished surface, the subtle imperfections left deliberately visible. Others saw more in it: a ceremonial object, a devotional portrait of the queen as a living manifestation of divine harmony. To them, the bust was not a lesson in art, but a prayer in stone. And then there were the skeptics, those who doubted even its authenticity. They whispered that the bust was too perfect, too modern, its colors too fresh for an object buried 3,000 years. Could it be a masterful replica created in the early 1900s, meant to captivate a Europe hungry for Egyptian wonders? For a time, the controversy lingered. Tests were done, pigments analyzed, materials dated, sculpting techniques compared. Each analysis led to the same quiet truth: the bust was ancient, real, and impossibly still alive in its perfection. But perhaps the most persistent theory of all is the one that touches the heart of her mystery: the idea that Nefertiti was not merely a queen beside Akhenaten, but a ruler in her own right. When Akhenaten's reign faltered, someone stepped into the power vacuum. The historical record mentions a figure known as Nefertiti, a pharaoh with both feminine and masculine titles. The name carries echoes of Nefertiti's own. Some inscriptions even show the ruler's elongated head and distinctive crown, signs unmistakably associated with her. Could it be that after her husband's death, Nefertiti took the throne, ruling under a new name? Could she have become the mysterious co-regent who bridged the years between Akhenaten and Tutankhamun? If so, it would mean that the woman whose face became the standard of beauty was also the one who quietly held Egypt together during its most fragile years. But if that's true, why was she erased? Some say she ruled too long and became too powerful. Others believe she tried to preserve Akhenaten's monotheistic faith, angering the priests of Ammon, who would later destroy all traces of the Aten cult. And there are those who suggest her death or disappearance was too politically dangerous to record at all. In each theory, her silence becomes an act of control, whether by choice or by force. Nefertiti managed to shape how history would remember her, not as a queen with a known fate, but as an eternal enigma.
Even the bust itself fuels debate. Her beauty is undeniable, but it's also unnerving. The symmetry, the smoothness, the faint, distant smile, they are too flawless, too deliberate. It's as if the sculptor was not depicting a person, but an idea. Look closely at her expression. There is no warmth, no pride, no arrogance, just calm. As if she already knew that one day, long after her temples fell, her face would stand alone, a monument to the unknowable. Some art historians call it the Mona Lisa of antiquity. But unlike the Mona Lisa, whose smile invites curiosity, Nefertiti's smile seems to hold it at bay. It keeps you at a distance, as though she were guarding something she doesn't intend to reveal. And perhaps that is the true reason her image endures. Not because of what it shows, but because of what it conceals. Every generation sees something new in her. To some, she represents ideal beauty. To others, feminine power. To others still, the tragedy of a woman erased by politics and time. But to Egyptologists, she remains a riddle in human form, a reminder that history is not a record of certainty, but of fragments. Fragments that we arrange and rearrange, hoping one day they'll form a whole. Yet the more we study her, the more she slips away, not in body, but in meaning. And maybe that's the secret of her immortality, not to be known completely, but to exist forever in the space between fact and fascination. As the centuries pass, her face has come to symbolize something far greater than one queen's story. It stands for the endurance of memory, the way beauty, mystery, and silence can outlast all empires. The sculptor who carved her could never have imagined this, that his unfinished work, hidden in a dusty studio, would one day travel across continents, become the centerpiece of a museum, and spark 1,000 theories about the woman behind the stone. And yet here she is, still watching, still waiting, her one completed eye fixed on eternity. Perhaps that is her final triumph, not her reign, not her power, but her silence. Because silence, unlike kingdoms, cannot crumble. It endures, it whispers, and it draws us back, again and again, to a single question that has no answer. Who was she really? In ancient Egypt, beauty was never just appearance. It was power. It was order. It was the visible reflection of divine balance, at, the harmony that held the world together. And Nefertiti understood this better than anyone. Her beauty was not simply admired, it was weaponized. It was the language through which she ruled, the veil through which she shaped belief. Every line of her face, every symbol on her crown, every gesture in her statues carried political intent. In a world ruled by gods made visible, beauty became a kind of divinity, and Nefertiti became its embodiment. When she appeared beside Akhenaten in temple reliefs, she wasn't a passive queen, she was an equal, sometimes even depicted performing the same sacred rituals as her husband, offering to the sun, blessing the people, standing beneath the Aten's rays, not as a shadow of her king, but as his reflection, his mirror in flesh and gold. The message was clear. The royal couple did not rule by beauty. They ruled through it. To the priests and citizens who saw her, Nefertiti was more than human. She was balance itself, the living proof that divine perfection could take human form. But perfection is a dangerous thing. It invites worship and envy, admiration and fear. Behind her graceful composure, the queen's image was doing political work of immense power. The serene face in the temple carvings calmed a restless nation. The flawless bust in the sculptor's studio set a divine standard no mortal could challenge. Her beauty became the face of the revolution, the visual anchor of Akhenaten's new religion. In the city of Amarna, art itself was reimagined. The old gods were gone. The rigid poses of tradition gave way to fluidity, intimacy, realism. And yet, amid this revolution, one thing remained constant: Nefertiti's image, always symmetrical, always serene, always perfect. It was as though Akhenaten's god, the Aten, found its truest reflection not in the king, but in the queen. Some scholars have even called Nefertiti the first woman in history to control her public image. She understood that beauty, when ritualized, could hold power greater than words or armies. Her statues were not portraits. They were instruments of belief. They reminded her people what perfection looked like, and in doing so, what order felt like. But that kind of perfection carries a cost. The more idealized her image became, the less human she appeared. The woman vanished behind the symbol, and when the political tide turned, that symbol became easy to destroy. When Egypt returned to the worship of its old gods, everything associated with the Aten faith was purged, temples defaced, names chiseled out, images smashed. Beauty, once her greatest weapon, became her greatest vulnerability. The same perfection that once protected her now made her a target. In a way, her disappearance was inevitable, because beauty in politics, in any age, is never neutral. It can charm, it can unite, it can distract, but it can also threaten. Nefertiti's beauty transcended the boundaries of gender and tradition. It placed her beside gods, and perhaps above kings. That was something Egypt's later rulers could not allow to endure, and yet, her image survived. Buried, forgotten, rediscovered, still perfect, still silent, still commanding awe. Even now, millennia later, her beauty remains political. It continues to challenge how we define power, femininity, and divinity. It asks us to question why we revere beauty and what we sacrifice to preserve it. Because when we look upon Nefertiti's face today, we are not just seeing a queen, we are seeing an ancient idea reborn, that beauty is not decoration, but persuasion, not vanity, but vision, a form of control wrapped in grace. Perhaps that is why her smile feels so distant, not warm, but knowing, as if she understands the illusion she created, and knows it will outlast us all. Her reign may have ended, her city may have fallen, but her beauty, the most deliberate political act of all, remains undefeated. Because true power does not always roar. Sometimes it simply gazes back, calm, eternal, and utterly certain of its own perfection. It was December, in the winter of 1912, when the desert winds of Amarna yielded a secret they had kept for over 3,000 years. A team of German archaeologists, led by Ludwig Borchardt, was excavating the ruins of the workshop of a royal sculptor, a man named Thutmose. Among the broken shards of statues, headless torsos, and forgotten tools, they uncovered something wrapped in dust and silence. When they brushed the sand away, they saw her. A limestone bust, the color of aged ivory. The face was serene, the neck impossibly long, the lips gently curved, almost smiling, the left eye missing, the other still gazing forward with calm authority. It was Nefertiti, the queen who had vanished, returned. For a moment no one spoke. Borchardt would later write in his notes, "It is indescribable, you must see it." And perhaps he was right, because beauty, real beauty, cannot be translated through words. It must be felt, in silence, in stillness, in that first moment when the past looks back at you. They packed the bust carefully, transported it down the Nile, then across the sea to Germany, a journey that would quietly ignite one of the longest debates in modern archaeology. In 1913, through an agreement with the Egyptian authorities, Borchardt claimed the bust as part of the German share of excavated finds. And from there, Nefertiti began her second life, not as a queen of Egypt, but as a queen of museums. She arrived in Berlin like a ghost out of sand. Unveiled only in private at first, her presence stunned those who saw her. She was not just an artifact. She was an apparition of perfection. The press called her Die schöne Königin, the beautiful queen. And soon, the world agreed. When the bust was finally displayed publicly, crowds gathered not to learn about Egyptology, but to gaze at her face, her symmetry, her stillness, her silence. It was as if time itself had stopped breathing, and all the centuries between her world and ours had folded in on themselves. She became more than a relic. She became an icon, a symbol of ideal beauty, of lost empires, and of the mysterious allure of the ancient world. Yet beneath that admiration lay tension. Egypt began to ask for her return. Was she stolen? Was she given? Was her beauty meant to live in a European museum? Or should she rest once more beside the Nile that had shaped her world? The debate was not only political, it was spiritual, because Nefertiti had never belonged solely to one nation. She belonged to history and to the questions that linger within it. In Berlin, she became a quiet obsession. Adolf Hitler reportedly admired her perfection, seeing in her the embodiment of what he called eternal beauty. He refused all Egyptian requests to return her. "She belongs to Germany," he said, "and she will never leave." But Nefertiti remained unmoved. Through wars, through bombings, through shifting borders and ideologies, she survived. During World War II, as the city burned, she was hidden away in a salt mine for protection. Surrounded by darkness and silence once again, the queen slept through yet another empire's rise and fall. When peace returned, she was brought back into the light, her skin untouched, her colors still soft and luminous. And people once again gathered around her glass case, whispering, staring, wondering. Who was she really? A queen, a co-ruler, a goddess, a mother, a strategist, a political mind behind the revolution of Amarna? Or perhaps a ghost, forever suspended between life and myth? In the still halls of Berlin's Neues Museum, she sits beneath dim lights, surrounded by fragments of a civilization that once believed in eternity. And as visitors pass, some speaking softly, some holding their breath, it's hard not to feel that she is watching them too. Not with judgment, not even with pride, but with a kind of eternal awareness, as if she knows that she has outlived them all. Empires fall, kings vanish, names fade, but her face remains. Nefertiti's journey, from Amarna's dust to Berlin's glass, is more than the tale of archaeology. It is the story of how history chooses what to remember and what to forget. Because every time someone looks into her single surviving eye, they see not just beauty, but the persistence of memory itself. And somewhere, beneath the still air of the museum, one can almost imagine her whispering, not in words, but in silence. I was never lost. You simply took longer to find me. It was as if time itself had stopped breathing, and all the centuries between her world and ours had folded in on themselves. She became more than a relic. She became an icon, a symbol of ideal beauty, of lost empires, and of the mysterious allure of the ancient world. Yet beneath that admiration lay tension. Egypt began to ask for her return. Was she stolen? Was she given? Was her beauty meant to live in a European museum, or should she rest once more beside the Nile that had shaped her world? The debate was not only political, it was spiritual, because Nefertiti had never belonged solely to one nation. She belonged to history, and to the questions that linger within it. In Berlin, she became a quiet obsession. Adolf Hitler reportedly admired her perfection, seeing in her the embodiment of what he called eternal beauty. He refused all Egyptian requests to return her. She belongs to Germany, he said, and she will never leave. But Nefertiti remained unmoved. Through wars, through bombings, through shifting borders and ideologies, she survived. During World War II, as the city burned, she was hidden away in a salt mine for protection. Surrounded by darkness and silence once again, the Queen slept through yet another empire's rise and fall. When peace returned, she was brought back into the light, her skin untouched, her colours still soft and luminous. And people once again gathered around her glass case, whispering, staring, wondering. Who was she really? A queen, a co-ruler, a goddess, a mother, a strategist, a political mind behind the revolution of Amarna? Or perhaps a ghost, forever suspended between life and myth? In the still halls of Berlin's Neues Museum, she sits beneath dim lights, surrounded by fragments of a civilization that once believed in eternity. And as visitors pass, some speaking softly, some holding their breath, it's hard not to feel that she is watching them too. Not with judgment, not even with pride, but with a kind of eternal awareness, as if she knows that she has outlived them all. Empires fall, kings vanish, names fade, but her face remains. Nefertiti's journey, from Amarna's dust to Berlin's glass, is more than the tale of archaeology. It is the story of how history chooses what to remember and what to forget. Because every time someone looks into her single surviving eye, they see not just beauty, but the persistence of memory itself. And somewhere, beneath the still air of the museum, one can almost imagine her whispering, not in words, but in silence. I was never lost. You simply took longer to find me. The afterlife. For the ancient Egyptians, it was not an end. It was a continuation, a second chapter in the story of existence, a place where the soul, if properly remembered, could live forever. And perhaps that is exactly what Nefertiti achieved. Not through tombs of gold, not through carved hieroglyphs, but through the endurance of an image, a single flawless face that time itself could not erase. Her name once disappeared from stone, her body from the earth, her story from the chronicles of kings. Yet, in the strangest way, her afterlife began not in Egypt, but in Berlin. It is said that in Egyptian belief, a person dies 3 times. First, when the body ceases to live. Second, when the body is buried. And third, the final death, when their name is spoken for the last time. But Nefertiti's name has never stopped being spoken. Every day, across continents and languages, she is remembered. Whispered about in museum halls, debated in lecture rooms, reimagined in films, novels, paintings, and dreams. Her immortality no longer depends on temples or rituals. It depends on curiosity. And curiosity, for her, is endless. Over 3,000 years after her reign, she continues to live many lives, each one crafted by the questions we ask about her. Some see her as a symbol of women's power, a ruler in her own right who dared to stand beside a king. Others see her as a mystery, the vanished queen who slipped through the cracks of history. And some perhaps see her as something simpler, a reminder of how fragile and yet enduring beauty can be. Every few years, the world rediscovers her. A new theory, a new documentary, a new scanning of ancient tomb walls that claims, this time, we've found her. In 2015, radar scans of Tutankhamun's tomb in the Valley of the Kings suggested there might be hidden chambers behind the walls. Some believed that those sealed rooms might contain the body of Nefertiti herself, that she had been buried beside the boy king who may have been her son. The world held its breath. But as always, the sand kept its secrets. No queen was found, only silence, only patience. Perhaps that is fitting, because Nefertiti has always belonged to the space between discovery and dream, between what we know and what we long to know. In that silence, she continues her afterlife, not in a tomb, but in our collective imagination. And if immortality is measured not by flesh, but by memory, then Nefertiti has already achieved eternity. Her story lingers in the breath of those who speak her name, in the footsteps of travelers who walk through Amarna's ruins, in the hum of museum air conditioning that surrounds her glass case, in the glow of the single light that falls upon her calm face. She is no longer simply Egyptian, no longer simply royal. She has become something larger, a thread woven through the entire human story, a symbol of how history resists finality, how the past never really stays buried, how even those erased from stone can return, more vivid than ever. And so, her afterlife unfolds, not in golden chambers, but in the eyes of every person who stops before her and feels time slip away. Because when you look at her, when you stand in that quiet Berlin gallery, surrounded by centuries of silence, it is easy to feel the illusion that she might blink, that she might turn her head just slightly and look back at you, not as a relic, not as a queen, but as a witness to all that has changed and all that has not. Nefertiti's afterlife is not bound by the gods she once served. It is bound by us, by our endless fascination, our endless search for meaning in the dust of time. She has outlived kingdoms, beliefs and languages. She has crossed oceans and wars. She has seen the rise and fall of new empires that called themselves civilized, and still she waits, not to be found, not to be returned, but simply to be seen. For that, perhaps, was her truest faith, that beauty, when made sacred, becomes eternal, that art, once born, becomes its own kind of God, and in that eternity, Nefertiti reigns still, silent, serene, unbroken, the queen who vanished, never truly left. She only changed the way she was remembered, because in the end, the afterlife of a queen is not carved in stone. It lives in the quiet wonder of those who still whisper her name, in the late hours of the night, when history feels like a dream, and dreams feel like history. You have reached the end of Nefertiti, the queen who vanished without a trace. A story not of loss, but of persistence, of silence that speaks louder than time.